So, good morning, everybody. I'd like to just start by saying a huge welcome, first of all. This is the fourth in the Banking on the Future series that Devil Smith has been doing, but it is the first one that we've actually managed to get people face to face. So, a huge welcome and thank you very much for coming. We're very excited to have you all here. I don't know if you can recognise or already noticed that Andrew Devil Smith, who's billed as the host and host with the most, is not able to make it. Unfortunately, he tested positive for COVID last Saturday. Now, for those of you who've ever heard us do this before, you'll know that Andrew is not only a fairly amazing host, but he's also incredibly disappointed to miss it. So I'm James Campion, I'm the Managing Director of Devil Smith. I'm going to do my best to try and fill Andrew's shoes and guide us through today. If I can just explain a little bit about the running order. So we're going to start off by turning it over to Rob Elder. Rob's the representative of the Bank of England, who's going to give us his unique view on the state of the world at the moment, without putting too much pressure on him. We're then going to, and that typically lasts about 10 to 15 minutes. Once Rob's finished, we're then going to get our esteemed guests and panel to introduce themselves. And then we've got about 17 or 18 pre-submitted questions. I don't think we'll have a chance to get through all of those because typically each question lasts about 6 or 7 minutes if we get ready to offer a view on it. But we also have, in true Saturday night and in Deck style, we have two of our roving mics. So if anybody feels brave enough to ask a question or wants to put a particular question to the panel, please put your hand up. We can send one of the mics out to you. You can ask a question to one of us. If I can start by asking Jane to introduce herself, then Andrew, then Madani, please, then we'll open the questions up.
We're all switched on. Good. Morning, everyone. My name's Jane Hollinshead. As you can see from the label, I'm the Managing Director of People, Culture and Customer Experience at Canary Wharf Group. I'm a relative newcomer to Canary Wharf Group. I've been in post for just over 6 months. As you can see, it's a very wide-ranging role. I have responsibility for over 1,200 people, which for a property company is quite a lot. I historically have had a very long career in real estate. I started off as a lawyer, 20 years at Addleshaw Goddard, where I was the head of real estate there. I then retired one morning and decided I was going to do something completely different. So I set up my own consultancy company. I was a consultant providing strategic advice to real estate companies for 5 years to companies like Knight Frank, Richland, Savills, wound that up to join Canary Wharf last year. In terms of the roles that I have outside my day job, I'm a non-exec director of a fund manager called Moorfield. Historically, I was a non-estate director in the G15 Housing Association, Notting Hill Genesis, and I also was part of an outfit called Pathways to Property, which looks to bring widening participation from disadvantaged minorities into the real estate industry, which is actually where my real passion lies.
Thank you, Jane.
Jane, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Andy Hay. It doesn't do what it says on the tin. I left Knight Frank 2 years ago, having had an incredible 37 years, sacked twice in the 80s, joined as the most junior person. Luckily in those days the HR system wasn't joined up, so I managed to sneak back in because I recognised it was an organisation that was on a mission and on a journey, and indeed it was, and I left in lockdown 2 years ago, which is an extraordinary event really, but it had grown to 19,000 people across 60 countries, still a private partnership with a great strong beating heart. And I do 5 things, the 3 deadly sins of law, banking and real estate. I also work in a small startup business and also in a consultancy business, and actually in the 5th largest family office in the world. So it's quite varied, which is a huge learning curve and greatly stimulating for me. When I try and explain these roles to my wife, she just smiles sweetly and says, "Darling, every village needs an idiot."
Sorry, after this one, I don't know where to start. Andrew, thank you. Look, it's maybe long, but I will try to shorten it. I was born in West Africa, in Guinea. I'm French national. I studied in France, mathematics and engineering. I worked in 3 parts of the world, 7 years in the Saudi, from 1981, 19 years in Paris. I was a board member of the biggest construction company in France, but it's also the first TV channel and third mobile phone business. I left after 37 years in the same group, and for the last 15 years I was leading the business for United Kingdom. I was CEO and chairman of Bouygues, doing small construction up to a nuclear power plant, PFI hospitals, etc. After 3 years of holidays in Cuba, my wife is from Cuba, I was told that there was an interesting opportunity to work for a wealthy family who is investing 1.3 billion in Whitehall to create the first London Raffle Hotel and 85 apartments. My job today is relatively wide. It's from creating the product, discussing with Guerlain for the spa, or F&B. I have 11 restaurants and bars, and I'm currently buying table clothing. You see, the job is extremely wide, very, very interesting, and I hope that we will make it a great success. In life, what am I interested? Why am I in the UK? What I love in this country is the creativity and the openness, which are big odds against the French culture.
I don't know if I should push back on that at all. We'll jump straight into our questions, if that's okay, for this panel. The first one we've had, I'm afraid there wasn't a name attached to it, so apologies if you've submitted it. I'm not giving you the recognition, but it is also worth noting, I think of the 20-odd questions, 19 of them had the word inflation in, so I'll try and not talk about that too much. But the first question reads, with uncertainty surrounding the rate of inflation and rising cost of living, what impact do you think this could have on the real estate market? Andy, could we start with your thoughts on that, please?
Thank you, James. Well, luckily I'm probably by far, well, the oldest person on the panel, and I remember inflation in the 1970s when it peaked twice, once at the beginning of the 70s and then once towards the end of the 70s, which Rob will correct me, but I think it nearly touched 23%. Which was pretty scary. And I also remember buying my first house, and real estate people always buy their own property at the wrong moment, so I bought it just as interest rates hit 15%. And I don't believe it's going to get to that because I think governments are much more focused, banks are more joined up, and actually there's much more global cooperation. Real estate has always performed well at a time of inflation. If you look back 100 years, real estate has followed the oil price almost identically, albeit with a lag of 6 to 9 months. So I'm confident that there's 2 drivers to the market in London. There's the top end, which is driven by both domestic and overseas money, and London is still the most important city in the world where people want to live. But more importantly, the domestic market is driven by job security and interest rates. And I think, Rob touched on job security, but I think it's interesting, there is an acute labour shortage, you're seeing it the whole time, getting good people, and every business, the business plan is 2 words, best people. That's why Deverell Smith are so important to business. But I in all the businesses I'm working, we can't find good people. Yes, there's going to be inflation, but I personally believe that the lower end of the market will be underpinned by the need to have a quality labour force. So yes, there may be a rise in unemployment, but I think there's going to be a big wage shift. So I think the bottom of the market will slow, but will be robust. And I think the top of the market, the demand curve, and Madani's seeing this in the old War Office, the demand curve, the supply is weak, demand is strong. And with inflation as well, and all the forecasts before the pandemic and before the war was still for London to grow 24% in 5 years. If anything, that could increase. So I think from the real estate perspective, it's good residentially. Commercially, we're seeing a big surge. and all the real estate firms are reporting really very strong performance. So it is going to be difficult. Firms are going to have to be nimble, and we all personally are going to have to tighten our belts. But I actually see a promising few years for the real estate sector.
Thank you very much. Darlene, can we get your views on that if possible, please?
Yeah, indeed, I agree with Andy, but I would like just to point out two small topics. The first one is there are many areas in United Kingdom where there are shortage of skills. And I was in construction for many years, and today when I visit the site, you may not like it, but it's extremely rare to see a British citizen on site working. When I see one, I make a joke with my construction director who is English. I tell him, oh, he's English, let's ask for his papers. To make sure really that he is English, because it's so rare.
How does that go down in the world of HR?
This is the first thing. My other comment, which is more serious, is beyond raising the profile of some jobs, I think everything will not be sorted by increasing the wages, because the client will not be able to pay all those increases. I think working on timetables, working on the way people are asked to work, maybe asking people to work 6 days a week, etc., will not work anymore. It may be 4 days, 5 days, more holidays, taking care of details, the size of the lockers, having lounges where people live, not having staff entrance close to the bin disposal. All those small details will help attracting people. And I think this is what we are trying to do. I have 500 people to recruit at the end of this year, and this is what I am focusing on, not just raising salaries.
Thank you. If I could put the next question to you as well, please, Madani. I'm keen to hear your views on how you see the differences between the French and the British markets, given that you've experienced both for an extended period.
How many days do I have? Look, the differences are just massive. The British are the one who invented real estate. The French and let's say the continent are just in bracket or have been small players. But what is good in the continent, and there are little rules, and the way to reach planning is easier than here. Here it's just a nightmare. You know, when you start, you don't know what you will end up getting, and you don't know how many years. In the continent, it's much easier. I haven't said it, but I am a trustee at the Epilepsy Society. We have the best research center in the world. In 3 years, we will disappear because we don't have any money. But we have a massive piece of land south of Buckinghamshire we would like to develop. Unfortunately, we are part of the Green Belt. Trying to have a meeting with the local authorities takes us 1 year. Government, there are elections coming, they are not going to tell us what they will do on housing. You see, this is point number one. Point number two is the cost to build. I remember having done a difference for government on the cost to build 100 homes in Calais and 100 homes in Dover. The difference is 25%. 25%. Cost of everything is too expensive in this country because of many reasons. But we don't have time to discuss it. You see, problems of skills, problem of cost, problem of planning. And these are very difficult to overcome and to develop the real estate market.
Thank you, Jane, I'm keen, we've discussed talent twice already. I'm keen to get your views on what you think the biggest talent challenges are, both for Canary Wharf and the wider real estate industry.
I think in terms of the real estate industry generally, we're not always first movers on things, are we? We tend to follow the pack quite a lot. And I think when I look at my day job and all the challenges that I face, I think we need to think a lot more creatively about where we can source our talent from. I mean, when we think about how real estate is changing and what I need in my day job, I need people that are way more operationally focused. You know, so should we be looking more about recruiting talent from leisure when we look at some of the issues that we have in terms of the shifting? Leases reduces in length, we're becoming more operationally focused business. So much of what I do on a day-to-day basis is led by data and data analytics and financial modelling. So we've got a combination of having a direction of travel where we have to be far more people-centric, far more customer-centric, but also far more led by data. And I think when I look back to the talent that was attracted into real estate, and a lot of them are coming from Reading and Oxford Brookes and that sort of thing, it's great, but we need to think way more inclusively about where you pick that talent from. So in truth, the challenges that the real estate industry are facing are no different to the challenges that we're facing at Canary Wharf. I think the other thing that we need to look at is that we have an ageing population. And so how are we going to shift the workplace culture? How are we going to provide training? How are we going to repurpose the offering that we have to our industry and within our own companies to ensure that that ageing population is still economically productive? At the other end of the scale, talking about some of the post-pandemic issues that we're facing, the next generation of talent that's coming through that we really have to attract into the real estate industry have very, very different expectations of what the workplace can offer. So I think there's a really big bookending of talent that we need to think a lot more creatively about. And some of the things that I've been focusing on in my first 6 months at Canary Wharf Group have been around how do we really make our workplace, our environment, an attractive place for that next generation.
Thank you. Now, apologies if I'm butchering the pronunciation of this person's surname. Daniel D. Abreu from Life Residential has asked the question, with a broad view of the sales market, are we due a softening or correction after the boom we're continuing to see? Andy, I was wondering if we could get your views on that first, please.
Thank you. Well, I'm assuming we're talking really about London residential, if I can make that assumption. The truth is that it's quite hard sometimes to, at the moment, understand what's happening to the market, and it's only when you look back that you really get the true picture. Apart from anything else, agents will always paint a rosy picture, and one has to try and see through that. And the reality is London didn't perform very well for about 5 or 6 years, running up to the pandemic in terms of value appreciation. And it was due an uplift, and as I said earlier, the forecasting from all the major firms pre-pandemic was for a 24% rise in central London, and you're seeing that coming through. It gets, as I said before, it comes back to interest rates and job security, which then drives confidence, which then drives activity. And as Madani has described, the planning system, not only the fact that it is very slow and inefficient, but actually it has tightened significantly, particularly in central London and Westminster. So the supply chain looking ahead in the sort of cream of the market in central London is acutely short, and nationally, we're not getting anywhere close to the number of houses we need to build every year. So there is, with an aspirational population, and still, despite the worrying rises in costs, with still a relatively affluent population, there is an acute shortage of stock. And on the horizon, we've got, and there's some experts in the room who know more about this than I do, but there's a review of leasehold and commonhold, which is being actively looked at the moment, which is likely to come through. It will take time because it's a massive structural change, but within the next 10 years. So the whole sort of terrain looking ahead is one where I think supply is going to become shorter. In addition to that, London has got the biggest volume of valuable period housing stock anywhere in the world. are these buildings environmentally compliant? No, they're not. What are landlords going to do? How's government going to influence change? Everything to me says actually for the properties that people are going to want to live in, there are fewer and fewer. So I see values actually holding up quite well.
Madani, I'm keen to get your views on that as well.
I'm not an expert. But
Oh yes, he is.
I live in London. It's the only place now where I have a property. I can just tell you that, as an example, if you compare the best neighborhood in Paris against what I would call a good neighborhood in London, the cost of the square meter is really from 1 to 2.5 or 3. London prices, it's my job to sell at the highest possible price, but London prices, in my view, are not reasonable. And government, they are just talking, they are doing just nothing. When you compare France to United Kingdom, same number of inhabitants, on the other side, they are building 400,000 homes a year, and they are saying that they are not building enough. Here, when it's 160,000, 170,000, they say, okay, we've done well. And what Andrew is saying will be, it's already a big problem, it will be a major problem. When I was active at Bouygues, there was one signal that I was following. It was the statistic concerning the age of the first-time buyers. Just have a look on the figures for this country. It is just frightening. Because the young people, they cannot buy. It's just impossible. And I live in a building in central London. Often I'm alone in the building. There are people who are buying flat, and the flats are empty for 8 years. 8 years. It's not normal. There is something wrong there. And somebody needs to do something about it. Where I'm working, we've been able to sell a flat for £11,000 per square foot. Thank you very much. But it's not reasonable. It is not reasonable. This is not normal price. And it is good for my shareholders, but somebody one day needs to correct this. London cannot be just going alone much higher than New York and other cities. It's not just right. It's my personal opinion.
But part of the issue is that more people want to live in London than Paris. But in all seriousness, and there is a serious point there. I mean, Paris is a fabulous city, but its global attraction. London typically attracts more than 70 nationalities a year. Paris is a gorgeous place, but it doesn't attract so many. And the problem is, it is a lot of people want to live in the southeast of England. And the government has had, well, there were, I think George Osborne did over 20 changes in property taxation in 10 years. And most recently, there's been 2 ramps up of stamp duty land tax. And that has still been absorbed by this demand. Unfortunately, we are a small island that actually protects the green belt. I'm sorry about that. For the benefit of the wider population and the beauty of the country. So it does produce this supply and demand imbalance. I'm not saying it's right, but they're basic economic factors.
Just one comment that it may, I find obvious, but maybe I'm wrong. Same population, France against United Kingdom. This country is more than twice smaller. Then, sorry, if you want to build the same number of houses, you need to build them somewhere. You are not going to build them in Colombia or I don't know where. You need to build them in your country and behind your home and on the various lands that are unused. How many hospitals or public government buildings are just abandoned that can be used? Somebody needs to do something about it. You cannot say 2 things that are contradictory. We want homes, but we don't want homes in our neighborhood. You need to do something about it. If not, you will have a massive problem with the young people.
Well, could I ask the panel all the same question in that case? If you're going to change one thing about the UK real estate industry, what would that be? Jane, if we could start with your thoughts on that, please.
Well, different perspective, but if I could change one thing about the UK real estate industry, I'd make it more inclusive. Just looking out into the audience, I did a quick snapshot before, and it's still not that reflective of UK society. So I think that's the one thing that I'd really like to change.
Thank you. Andy?
The planning system, which Madani touched on, it's understaffed. It's hugely under-resourced. It's probably underqualified in many places, and it needs to accelerate. And it needs to have a much clearer mandate to provide the point that Madani's made. So it needs government direction, and we still don't build up enough. Madani's absolutely right. We are a tiny island, and we're very short of homes. And the Canary Wharf Group, are beginning to show what can be done. But London is still a very flat city. You go up 8 floors, you can see forever. We need to have much more high-rise. I see it as the most affordable way with the release planning system.
Madani?
I will join Andrew. Real political will, not blah blah blah. The real political will.
Fantastic. Okay. I'm conscious that. Thank you very much. I'm conscious that I've been only taking questions that have been pre-submitted. Is anybody feeling brave enough to ask anything from our panel? I think there's somebody right at the back there with a hand up. Apologies, Sally, you're going to have to get your sprinting shoes on.
Thanks for your effort. Michael Schmidt, Head of Investment at Telford Homes. Andy, I appreciate your view on the for sale kind of pricing expectation. What is your view on build to rent, given that we can expect interest rates to rise further? Where do you see cap rates going?
Good question. Hand it over to Rob. That whole sector does, I've 40 years of real estate. I've seen a lot of new product, new ideas, and several cycles. And just on that, the prospects that Rob described here look awful, but actually there's one thing that the UK real estate market is resilient. And I wrote down the other day all the things I'd seen, and it's extraordinary how things recover. That sector worries me. I see so many funds from around the world piling into it, and I do worry. I sit on a multifamily office which has 52 billion of private capital, and their real focus is real estate investment, and they are, I think, rightly worried that sector is being overpushed at the moment. But it's an important element of what we need to do in this country. I'm nervous.
Madonna, keen to hear your views on that, the same topic if possible.
I will have a little nuance. If I cannot buy, but I need a house, therefore, where am I going to get my house? I will need to rent. If I have to rent, somebody must have built and finance it. If it is not government, it's not an insurance company, it has to be a private people. If they are not motivated to build, I will have a massive issue. Therefore, my opinion, and when I was at Bouygues, leading Bouygues, and I see that they are continuing, we believe that in this country, the light for people will be through renting and therefore building. Bouygues, originally in France, there is a development company, but the construction company just built, never built to rent. In this country, we build and rent. and particularly in East London, Barking, etc., in all these areas where land price is reasonable, this is happening. And now they are starting to do it in Westminster in partnering with the borough. My view is this is a very important axis that the government should try to stimulate to help people finding a home. Because there is, in my view, there is no other solution.
But Madani, I would challenge, and you're absolutely right, but you need to build where people want to live and work. And I'm not convinced that that's necessarily happening. And my worry is it's becoming, and understandably, institutionalized as opposed to being built actually for the occupant and the customer. The drivers, I think, are not aligned to where they should be.
Jane, I'm keen to...
If you have
sorry,
a week of discussion, maybe, but we'll discuss together later.
I mean, one of the big tenets of Build to Rent is the experience of living there. I know that you're quite a passionate advocate of customer experience as a large part of your job. I'm keen to get your views on that, if possible, please.
I think it comes back to how we structure ourselves as real estate companies, isn't it? And I think historically the work that I've done, and you know, whether that's with companies like Knight Frank, I've seen an extraordinary transition where you start off from a position where you have areas that are very siloed. So the operational expertise in companies is very siloed. It's offices, it's retail, it's residential. And actually I think the whole thing needs to be flipped on its head, where you start with the end user, you start with the end consumer and what their experience is, and then you work your way backwards so that you break down those silos and you're using different metrics. I think in estates like Canary Wharf Group, when you think of the transition that we've gone through in terms of what we started off and what we are now and what we will be in the future, that diversified customer base and the synergies that you get from that when you generate the insights, you identify and anticipate what the customer needs are, and then you work out, you know, how all the interdependencies operate between the two, so you generate this additionality in terms of using the data and the metrics to inform your strategy. I think that's where you really start moving forward. And I think, to go to the previous point about, we can't just build boxes for people to live in or rent. We have to create experiences where the end user really wants to be there. They really want to sort of see what the look and feel is between the buildings. And it's this whole concept of placemaking and how you enliven it. And I think that's the transition we need to make, both in terms of how we think about real estate and how we actually use real estate. And if we get there, I think you're going to do something that's actually notably different. I'm not sure what you think about that.
And well, I was keen to get your view on this, because I know that during your tenure at Knight Frank, you led a fairly significant and incredibly successful customer experience programme. I wonder if you could walk us through that in a bit more detail and talk us through why you did it and what the outcome was.
Well, yes, just very briefly. I think in any industry, you absolutely have to put the customer first and foremost. And what I'm amazed at is how few organisations do. And the 5 organisations I'm working with at the moment, the first thing I asked in all of them was, when did you last do your last customer listening? One of them hadn't done one for 261 years. And it's enormously, it's enormously powerful when you do it, for so many reasons. And actually at Knight Frank, about 5 years ago, I used to go around to all the offices, and I suddenly realised, getting the same question again and again, will I have a job in 10 years' time? Will a state agency exist? What's happening with the world of online? What about purple bricks, etc., etc.? And we suddenly thought, wow, actually, you know, we really need to understand this. So we went and we spent over a year approaching 30,000 previous and current clients of the firm, and got back the most incredible piece of customer feedback, which then caused us to go on, and I think it is an ongoing journey, to really and truly put the customer at the centre of everything we did. So every agenda, every business plan, the first consideration was customer. And I think Knight Frank's gone on to win in 2 years, customer service awards. And you know, you look at TrustAdvisor, and there's some really extraordinary things happening. Still a long way to go. but the customer is everything, and I think so many firms have been quite successful by blindly following a strategy and being very energetic, but actually when you start to truly embrace the customer, it's hugely important for them. And the key finding that we found was, yes, tech was really important. They wanted really good communication. They expected first-class advice because it was a strong brand. But the thing over and above all that they wanted was a human, personal relationship and brilliant service. And it just came through so strongly. And in the other organisations I'm now working with, we're trying to sort of to reproduce that. And interestingly, you've seen many real estate firms do incredibly well over the last 2 or 3 years. As far as I'm aware, the one that's made consistently the biggest losses is Purple Bricks.
Madani, given your current role, I'm very keen to hear your views on the customer and how you approach it.
The area where I'm working is extremely narrow, because my clients are extremely wealthy people. Therefore, I'm not doing what Andrew is explaining fully. What I'm doing is we are trying to be modest and to see in Asia and in the US what's happening. What, for the type of products we are having, what are they doing to make sure that the clients or the owners are satisfied? The summary is very simple. Indeed, they expect to have building, etc., which are just fantastic, everything is working. What they need and what they want is just maybe simple. They want the best possible service, and they want everything at the minute. Those people, they are in their flat, they say, I want my car. Before they arrive with the lift below, the car must be there. How do you do that? Knowing that the car is at level 4, you need people who understand how to do it, and you need the technology that will help you doing it. This is what I'm doing.
Thank you. I was wondering if we could invite any more questions from the audience. Sally, I'm very sorry to say it's right at the back. Oh, you're already there. Great.
Hi, there's a number of companies looking at building affordable housing within the London space and selling them on a shared ownership model, essentially whereby the customer is basically buying 25% of the equity and then renting the remaining 75% at a discount to market rentals. I wonder if the panel has a view on the future of that market.
I think it's great, but it may not completely satisfy the affordable question. I mean, it's certainly a step in the right direction, and like or loather, I think one of the great things that Margaret Thatcher did was to enable people in council houses to begin to buy their own properties, and then you have pride of ownership, and it has a very positive effect on a community and indeed on a family. But there is still, as Madani's very eloquently stated, there is still this huge affordability problem, and I'm sure it will help many people, and it's to be encouraged. It's been very successful in the United States, but I still think we need to build more affordable homes in the right places. We're way short. And I still look at some of the local authorities who are sitting on significant amounts of period housing stock, which is poorly maintained and badly used, and it's now going to be environmentally unfit for purpose. And I think there's a real responsibility there to tackle a lot of that.
I think it's, I say this with my previous hat on as a non-exec director of Housing Association, and I think you have an intrinsic link between affordable housing and the point that you made around building safety, because generally the shared ownership model tends to be in high-rise units. And I think with some of the complications and the costs that are going to be coming down the line with the building safety bill, it's not going to be quite as straightforward as you say. So what as a tenure it might be great, but as a physical configuration, I think there are going to be challenges until you have this element of cladding and building safety properly bottomed out.
I think we've got time. I think looking at the clock, we've got about 8 or so minutes left. I think we can invite one more question from the audience. I think there's something there with his hand up.
Keeping on the same subject, sorry, Ian Merrick. Discount market rent has reared its head in London, out at Greenwich. Why are we all thinking about affordable housing, which is pigeonholing society, and not actually going towards discount market rent, pepper potting them through society and creating what you're requesting, which is a fairer community? I just wonder what your thoughts are.
Well, Dani, I noticed you nodding along there.
It's a really good question, Ian. I'm not certain I'm equipped to answer it. David Mumby.
I can answer it for you.
Please do. Yeah.
The investors are very nervous about being pigeonholed into a valuation on the discount market rent. When it was introduced, it had a time period that was going to be fixed, and therefore in your business models it could actually be financially allocated. Now different councils are offering different terms, and until there is a fixed period, I think you'll find that it won't come into society, although it could benefit society really well.
Would a change of government help?
I've not seen any government actually get to grips with any housing. They need to grow up and actually listen to the customer, which is all of us.
It appears to be a recurring theme.
Good question.
One more question, I think. Is there anybody else? Laura, fantastic.
Elena Bondas, Clarion Housing Group. To answer part of the previous question, there is the
Sorry,
first
could you
homes-
speak up a little bit? I'm afraid we can't hear you.
Yeah. To answer the previous question, there is the First Homes initiative that's implemented at the moment, so that's a discount market rate. Yeah, so most councils are implementing that one already. In terms of pressure from construction costs, there is an expectation that the house prices will increase as well. And I'm wondering, in terms of affordability criteria, is there an expectation to relax these? And if so, are we concerned of repeating a 2008 crisis? Or are we just going to let the salaries increase? Thank you.
I think that nicely brings us to a close bang on time. I'd just like to finish by saying a huge thank you to Rob and the other panellists for their time and input today. And